Welcome. It's time to call to order this work session of the Farmington School Board on Monday, September 12th, 2022. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's good to be back in a regular cadence again. I'm sure all of those who are working full-time in the district feel the same way. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. We've got a pretty good group of topics as well as some policy discussions ahead of us today. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add or remove from the agenda or any other discussion points? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Motion by Hannah, second by Steve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. So our first item is back to school report from Chris Bussman and Lisa Edwards. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening, Chair Christensen and members of the board. We are here tonight to talk a little bit about back to school, some work that has been completed over the summer, et cetera. And so we're going to kind of refer to our operational plan and talk about a few things as they relate to that as we go along here as well. Overall, from elementary, I would say that the first week, workshop week, was definitely very busy with teachers getting into the groove again with lots of staff development. We had not done as much as we had, or we did more than we have in the last 2 years, probably this year, trying to get into the swing of it. And then it was a great start. I heard lots of good things from all the elementaries as I checked in with them last week. It was very busy, but it was a good busy all week long, they said. So that was a great start. So first of all, let's just talk a little bit about what some of those staff development things were that go along with our operational plan. And we did touch base on some of this in the Friday notes as well. But we wanted to focus again on designing learning experiences in the classroom. So K through 12, our teaching and learning team went out and presented to each staff over Staff Development Week and just did a presentation about what they were, kind of refreshed it, and then made sure to let the teachers know how they could engage with our members of our teaching and learning team as they carry on the work this year. And so that goes right along with the competencies. We've done lots of competency work through the summer. As far as elementary, we have new ELA standards K through 12. So the elementary worked on our K through 5 ELA competencies, kind of reworking them and then creating working learning progressions that teachers can use whether they're using competencies or not that go along with the new standards.
And I think this summer too, one of the things we have to constantly remind ourselves is kind of that attrition of staff. And so we had 37 new teaching staff that were part of our new staff orientation. And then on top of that, I think we had equally, if not more, support personnel across the district. And so when you've been in an organization a long time, there's a lot of assumptions that can be made as far as what people know or don't know. And so we had to be really intentional about helping bring people up to speed around what is competency-driven learning and how do we support that. At the secondary level, had a great back-to-school start. We had our web programs at both of our middle schools and our link program at the high school on the first day. I reflect back to the summer because, and Jason has said this before too, but it felt like for the last couple of years, in a district where we like to have a lot of autonomy and give people that freedom to act, we've been telling people what to do for a long time. And so, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we did because we did a lot of professional engagement with staff and it was a lot of fun because we got to have a lot of really deep conversations about things that have been kind of pushed to the background a little bit. So as Lisa mentioned too, around our presentations to staff, we talk a lot about, those learning experiences, the difference between those that are difficult versus those that are complex. And so I had a lot of conversations around what that would look like as well. Had mentioned last April, I believe, that we had presented about how do we make our competency-driven system more understandable by our learners, by our staff, and by our community. So we've spent a significant amount of time this summer re-ramping the reporting system for the middle level. And so that's going to be ready to come live. They're going through some of the training components of it right now. All of our students at the middle level, because they have a transitions class, are going to have a number of different lessons around just what are competencies, what does it mean to be a competent competency-driven system, how do you purposely engage in feedback and reflection? So really methodical about going through all of that with our learners just to reestablish that base. We've built a middle school competency handbook for our staff so that it's got a lot of going back to the why around this and what that means. We're going to be working on scaling out for our families as well. We've had in-person events before, but we're going to look to see what we can do to have some kind of on-demand resources so that parents can access some things kind of on their own terms, their own time. And as I mentioned before, I had a lawnmower that didn't want to work this weekend, so YouTube helped me with 3 videos, and I took a carburetor apart, which is kind of messy, by the way. But it works, right? And so that on-demand piece of it.
And then I would say at the elementary competencies too, we're just digging into how we can use campus learning and leverage that to help report out about competencies for the teachers that are using that model as well. And that kind of sums up what we did in competencies. I know in the middle school, they also worked in 6 through 8 with the language ELA standards and made those into competencies. And then I believe there was some social work work standards work that happened as well?
Yep, we pulled our ELA group, and so we made banded competencies, so 4 competencies across grades 6, 7, and 8. Rich conversation, same thing with social studies. Music did their 3rd iteration. Science, I think, is on their 3rd iteration. We are starting up health and phy-ed here in the next couple of weeks. And then we did a little bit of a revamp of our personal skills for success at the middle school, which really ties into our portraits of lifelong learners, but in more middle school kind of language, so.
Yeah, and then throughout the operational plan, you'll see a lot of focus on literacy. So we started that work last spring in the buildings, really talking about the big 5 of literacy, kind of going back to basics and making sure that people really understood that. As Chris mentioned before, we don't always know where the level where everyone is, so we wanted to get everyone the same information, and then we build from there as we move along. And so we are continuing that work this year very deeply. So we had with that, I was going to say, we have a CEIS grant, and with that, we were able to add 2 instructional coaches who will have the focus of literacy this year for the elementary schools. So they'll be kind of spread across the elementary, and then we have Carrie Benton is our literacy coordinator that works in our teaching and learning department. And so they've been doing a lot of great work with that. They presented at each of the elementary buildings during the workshop week as well, kind of getting back to basics and then building on that, showing those learning progressions, helping teachers understand that. And we just have this good path that we're following and going to dig in deeper into diagnostic assessments, kind of seeing where kids are at, and then how we can really plan for those individual needs. So it's a lot of exciting work. Some of the buildings also have outside consultants that they're bringing in, because as you know, our buildings also have autonomy over what they're doing within their staff development. And so we were able to work with those consultants or be present at those consultants so that we can bridge everything that we're doing together. So it's like a concerted effort together.
Are the literacy coaches you mentioned, are those similar to the science coaches like Rick Yonkers and others who presented to us in April last year? Is that similar? Similar type of model or similar type of intent?
A similar type of intent, yep, except they're going to be housed in the buildings. So each one of them will be a halftime. So there's 3 people taking those 2.0, and I'll have be a halftime at each at 4 of the elementary schools.
Okay.
So based on how the grant works and the buildings that we have to focus on. Sure. So they're going to be housed in the buildings so they can make a deeper connection with those specific staff in that building, and even some of the students.
Whereas Rick and others are traveling more.
Yep, they're kind of
as in around Farmington.
But, exactly. And so I would say Carrie just works very closely with them to keep them connected to our department at all times. And then I kind of pull into every once in a while to work with them. And they're always invited to our teaching and learning meetings if they're able to make it. But their focus is definitely more at a building level than a district level.
And why not all 5 elementaries, Lisa?
Because of the grant, the money that it's used from, we were only able to get 2 FTEs, and making them less than that was hard. And then the focus is on those 4 buildings based on the data.
Whichever school is not getting that additional support is there
a plan?
Yeah.
Yep. So there's a plan in place to make sure that they're getting similar information. So anything that comes from our teaching and learning team or the district level, definitely we make sure that all 5 elementaries are getting that. So even though Maddie Sullivan was one of our coaches who works in 2 buildings, she presented at all 5 of the elementary buildings. So they work together as a team, and then Carrie Benton will make sure that she goes and supports the other building
Okay.
does not have a coach.
Are
Yeah.
those staff, are they like TOSAs? Like on, or they're just like, were they internal hires essentially though, that had another position in the building and now they're doing this?
Yeah, it was posted internal and external, but all of the people that we have are internal candidates, or internal people that have been on our staff before.
And how long are those positions funded for? The grant, is it a couple years?
We have to
or-
reapply for the grant every single year.
Oh, every year.
Yep.
So do we backfill those positions, to Jacqueline's question on that, that we had those open positions? I'm assuming they were teachers, so did we already backfill those spots to
Oh, yeah.
quickly?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and actually Maddie Sullivan was a coach last year in the building. We had 2 people and one of them quit mid-year, but Maddie stayed the whole year.
Because like Rick's in a great role, but I hated to see him come out of
The classroom.
classroom.
Yep. Yeah, and actually, I'm just gonna say, it worked out perfect in all of them, because one was a halftime person who was looking for full-time in the building, and one of our coaches, so that was excellent. She didn't get pulled out of a different position. And the other one was halftime phys in one of the buildings, and so it worked like a great, the dominoes fell in the right direction for that. So not a whole lot of disruption to kids.
Are those positions usually pretty easy to fill like that? Is that normal when we have?
They are not easy to fill, no.
You need the right
Right
people.
person.
You need the
Yeah.
right
Okay.
people, and
Yep.
that sometimes
There
can
was
be
a little bit
difficult to
of,
find.
nudging from my part, little
Begging and pleading,
pleading,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, to just find the right people.
Yeah, so tonight was really about kind of providing a really brief overview from the district level, and then this is going to be followed up with kind of some presentations by buildings over the next few months where they can kind of get into some of the real details of what it looks like at each of those sites. So something a little bit new and different this year that we're adding.
Yeah, I remember last year in October, I think we had, I don't remember, I think his name's Bill, data guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
and there was a really good presentation about, or sorry, in-depth presentation about kind of academic performance over the years and the steps you're taking. I remember having a conversation with you actually about Sunday Learning System and kind of the Big Five and learning about that. It was
Yep.
instructional for me last year. And actually, you know, a lot of people are focused on the MCAs because all the Minnesota report card came out. It's still not great, but it's encouraging because what I see in all of our elementary schools is where we had a decline in some of those metrics since probably 2018. They seem to have leveled off and in many cases improved. So I think last year at this time, you were saying, you know, we were implementing Sunday, got disrupted by the pandemic. I think the work and the results that, or the work that went into last academic year is showing up. So I'm happy to see that. So.
Yeah, and I think the way that they've kind of divvied up the grant too, they had a little different model last year, but I think shifting to this model with more people that can be bedded in the buildings will be more beneficial as well. Because to Lisa's point, you have people that are connected with the buildings and get to know, and not that our other coaches don't, but they get spread pretty thin when there's, you know, 4 of them, and now they can get additional support and do the sorts of things that can really dive in deep. And you know, it's like anything, it's not, none of that stuff turns overnight and none of that stuff happens, but it gives you a path out and a path to move forward. So I know they feel really good about it.
And you'll get to see Chris and I back in October, because we always do World's Best Workforce and
they-
bring
that's
back
why-
some of that
I think that's why
data.
Bill
Yep,
was
and
here,
Bill,
yeah.
you might see Bill even, we're still working on that.
Yeah. So I think at our next meeting, it is FES, Bachman, and Riverview that are
Correct.
going to come and share. And that's going to be more of a high-level thing, so that's going to be mainly adults. And then our thought is to get back into that mode of where we bring our learners in and do some of the showcases and things like that. But since it's been basically 2.5 years since we've done any of that, we didn't want to
crazy.
like grab kids and say, hey, here you
Been that
go,
long.
weekend of school, let's bring you. So we're going to kind of do a similar sort of thing with the buildings through the first part of this year. And then when we get back out of the holidays and get into the spring, then have them bring kids back so that they can demonstrate and share and do some of those other things. So we'll get back into those cadences as well. Because, I mean, we can talk about it, and the buildings will do a good job talking about it, but
Yeah.
the ones to listen to are, well, these two and then the other learners that come, so.
And just a couple follow-up questions. For the teaching and instructional learning team, is that upon request, like teachers need to ask for that? Or do they kind of check in routinely,
Yep.
regular touch points?
So they're always available when people requests, they can sign up for them. But then our coaches do go out to the buildings and will sit intentionally in a building for a day. So then that way they can easily walk down to rooms, or they strategically place themselves a lot in the lunchroom. So then as teachers come in to grab some food or snacks,
talk to
hey, how's it going?
That's great.
And can just touch base, so.
That's great. And then the other follow-up question was, I know towards the end of the year last year, when we talked about the GEL program at the elementary level, and just wondering, as the team was talking about different learning experiences, if that's still something that you maybe could just refresh us on, some of the ideas to support kids that may need more advanced support. I know we had talked about how it wasn't kind of functioning in the traditional sense, so there were a lot of great ideas about how we could do that moving forward this year with a different approach.
Yep, so it really goes into that design of learning experiences, and then the personalized learning that we are working on. So just supporting the teachers when they have students like that, and so our TOSAs are always available too, to also walk into classrooms and help them develop that, as well as working within teams within their buildings, across grade levels, across content areas as well, and then working with their administrator on how to best meet the needs of that, and then also the family, right?
Yeah,
So then meeting with the family and talking about, what do you think should happen? What, how can we meld this to make it the best experience for the child?
Got it. So, and it still sounds like the best approach for parents who have any questions is to always start with their teacher, their kiddo's teacher.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yep.
and one of the hard parts, right, I mean, the idea in the GEL model is out of that mindset of, we're gonna organize around birth date, and we're not gonna organize around learning.
Right.
And so what the pandemic helped us do is figure out, how do we better organize around the learning needs? Because just because I share a birth date with a group of kids doesn't mean that I may be in the same place. And how do we organize around that? Now, there's lots of barriers to that, because the system isn't set up like that, and they don't like when you do things like that. But I think it's, to the question you ask, it's more along those lines of, how do we move people around? How do we bring in different types of things? How do we figure out which group of kids may need support? And support isn't, sometimes support is thought as a negative term, but how do we do that? And how do we organize that within teams, within buildings, where, I guess the question always is simply a pullout for 20 minutes. It serves during that time, but what about the rest of the times and stuff? So it's things that they're still working on and still trying to figure out. But I think, to your question and to Lisa's point, right, it really begins with, what does that learner need?
Right.
And how do we figure out where is that strength, and how do we build off of that? So.
And it's always a balancing act a little bit too, right? Because when you have a classroom of 20 to 23 kids and one teacher, trying to find a way with that team approach that you've described to provide those personalized learning experiences while also not overwhelming our teachers, right?
well,
Because they're only one
I was
person
gonna
at
say,
the end of the
and so
day.
they work with other teachers in grade levels as well. So, we don't always see it, but kids are not always in their homeroom all day, even at the elementary level. So they will sometimes have math or reading in other rooms or with other teachers, and that helps meet those needs too. So it really is organized differently, building by building. Well, learner by learner, it's organized differently.
I want to say, coming from a student who was in the traditional GEL program a long time ago, you learn most of your things not from the program itself, but from being with different kids, sometimes who need the same things as you do, but also in your normal classes, like your homeroom, you learn a lot of things, not necessarily school-related, but those fundamentals kind of that an elementary school student needs to kind of grow as a learner and a person. So kind of communicating that to parents, that it's not, GEL program means you're above everyone else. It's kind of like you're still learning, getting better in different ways.
Thanks for sharing.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. Our next topic is preliminary levy discussion. Jane Huska.
You can just stay up here now.
Thank you.
Settle in.
Settle in.
Yeah, I'll try to make this as painless as possible, because I know not everybody loves numbers as much as maybe myself and Jason does, but we'll get through it.
And this is the levy conversation we talk about every year when it comes
Correct.
to our I just want to set that baseline for anyone watching and for the folks in the audience that, you know, we may be talking about some other levy conversations later, but this is not that yet.
Correct. Yep, so what we're gonna be talking about here is our levy process that we go through each year. Levy, part of our revenue that comes into the district, most of it has a two-prong approach, levy and aid. Levy comes from taxpayers, aid comes from state. Almost all of these formulas are set in statute. There's not a whole lot that we can do within a district to manipulate these numbers in any way, shape, or form. So you can be happy, mad, or sad at the district, but we really don't get to say much about these numbers. They come from the state, they make the laws, and we basically follow them. So what you have in front of you and up on the screen really is preliminary numbers, and I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. I got this first report on Thursday. We met with MDE on Friday for over half a day, going through a 40-page report that is all formulas, trying to figure out the nuances, what calculations are correct, which ones still need to be tweaked, and there are some. I did see right before I came, like at 4:30, they just posted another run, and they'll be running runs every day now until the end of September. So these numbers are a little fluid. The numbers that I did see that were inaccurate on our report on Thursday, I tried to make my best guess estimate at what they should be. So don't write these in concrete as of yet. So as we look at our preliminary levy, we will be looking at our payable 23, what actually funds the 23-24 school year. That gets a little confusing, so I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. We're going to take a quick look at our first three items on our spreadsheet, referendum equity and our location equity. They basically all have two variables the same that are causing them to increase. One, which we all have felt within the last year, and that's an inflation. There is an inflationary factor in that formula that has caused those three to increase over prior year. The second is both of them have had calculation changes due to legislation or due to our net tax capacity or our referendum market value. So anytime any of those change, these numbers will change as well. And a lot of times it's just a shift between aid and levy, because the state may see that they feel that we are better suited to pay more and they pay less. And so basically that's the reason for those first three and the changes within those. As we move down, we have reemployment. We've been talking about this every year. This number hasn't really changed since COVID hit. As you can imagine, reemployment for us in the working world is unemployment, and we haven't had a bill yet since COVID hit. So they have sent us some bills, some preliminary. Every time we get one, it's less and less because they find more money to apply to it. So I just put $5,000 in there just as a little hold. Literally, it could be $100,000 and $125,000, but I'm not going to levy that because I don't know what that is. So then we can scroll down to the bottom where we go prior year adjustments. One thing to remember when we are putting the numbers in for the proposed levy, they are just that, estimates. They're best guess as of today or when they finalize the levy. So when you see those prior year adjustments, those come in when we're finalizing our numbers. There are some adjustments that are 1 year and then some that are 2, and there might be even some that are 3 years out based upon the different truing up that we do throughout this process. And that's what you see in that prior year adjustment. There is some COVID adjustment in there, and there is an OPEB adjustment that is in that prior year adjustment.
Sorry, what's OPEB?
Other post-employee benefits. Yep. As we move to community ed, there's really not a whole lot to talk about here. Some things to know is community ed funding is based on the district population. So when the district population changes, their funding changes. One area that I'd just like to point out is our school-age childcare. You can see that it decreased by 180,000, or I'm sorry, 90,000 down to 180,000. And that really stemmed from when COVID hit. We had a pretty good school-age care program, right? We had a bunch of kids that have, and this money is for kiddos that come into that program that may need one-on-one services or, you know, some special care, that we are allowed to levy additional dollars to support those children in our after-school program. And as you can imagine, those are also our children that are the most fragile, and sometimes they can't be in those settings. And so we've seen a reduction in those kiddos, but we also have seen that we haven't been able to hire staff. And so it's kind of a twofold there. But that adjustment, that prior year adjustment that you see, almost all of that has happened because of, that's when COVID hit, right? We estimated we were gonna spend, let's just say 270,000, COVID hit. Well, then they true up, and then you have to give the money back, right? We don't keep it. And so that's what you're seeing happen in that community ed number there. As we move down to debt service, the first number that we're going to be looking at is our initial debt service, and that is all of the interest and principal payments that the district will be making in 23, 24. And it goes up a little bit, and that's just the way our debt is structured. So when we initially issue our bonds, we structure our debt, and this is just how our interest and principal payments have fall for that year. And know that that should be one of the highest. It should start coming back down. We're gonna start having some debt fall off. Actually, in FY '23, right, we're talking original, I didn't have time to look up exactly what it is today, but when we originally issued the bonds, we were gonna have $11 million of that bond is coming off, you know, and it just goes up from there. 24, it's 28 million, 27, it's 91 million, 28 is 2 million. Now, remember, those are the original issuance of the bonds. I didn't look at specifically they were at today.
Do you remember what they paid for?
So bonds always pay for buildings.
Okay, so
So
back to the high school.
like the high school is the 27, that 91 million. When we originally issued it, it was 112 million.
Okay.
So when you think about that, buildings or bonds are for buildings. It could also be for deferred maintenance type stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean it's building a structure, but that sort of things. Levies are for learning.
But the ones that are coming off are high school construction, I mean, they go that far back, right?
Oh, they go further back than that. So I could look what's coming off in '23. If I had to guess, it's probably after Meadowview, so I don't know what we did between Meadowview and the high school. So something in that era is probably what's coming off.
Yeah, we hit a growth spurt, and that's one of the things that kind of impacts our levy is the really quick growth and need to build additional buildings. I started in 1993, 94, and you just look around, the addition to Bachman, then Dodge was just right at that same time, and then Riverview, Meadowview, the high school, you go right down the roads. We got a bunch of buildings in the last 25 years that were put up, and, it's like paying off your house. It slowly goes down, and we're getting there.
We're getting there.
But that's one of the things that's kind of impacted us over the last number of years.
Yep. And as we go down, there's a reduction for debt excess. That is written right in statute. We are allowed to carry 5% over what our interest and principal payments are on our debt for the year in Fund 7. And once you're over that, in our fund balance for Fund 7, they just say that's debt excess and they take it back type thing, which is fine. I mean, and the reason that we're allowed the 5% is if for some reason the state, it wasn't that many years ago, or maybe it was, that they changed the payment schedule when the state got in a little bit of trouble with money. They want to make sure that you have enough money to make your debt payments because it's huge on ratings.
Because how are we paid? We're paid 90/10?
Yeah, right now.
So we get 90% of what the state owes us that year, and then we get the 10% the following year.
Yep.
And then when they were doing it, they were splitting, what was it? It was.
Well, so what was happening is they did make a change where we do get our money now prior to February when we have to make our big payments. What they were doing is they were spreading our debt aid coming into the district over the whole calendar year. And so we were making payments before we even got our money in. So they did fix that for our debt payments. And we're thankful for that. Everybody is, because cash flow became a real issue for so many districts.
But I know every time, well, when they've had issues, 90-10, and then they talk about 85-15, 70-30. I mean, think about how that impacts the operations of a business if,
Right.
you got to wait a full year to get 30% of revenue that you don't have any control over.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Yep. And so then we go to the very bottom line, and you can see that increase is 4% there. Now, what you have to remember, that does not mean we're generating 4% more in revenue. What it means is our levy is going up 4%. And that also doesn't mean that a taxpayer or a household owner is going to see a 4% increase. Because the biggest factor for a homeowner that affects their taxes is their valuation. And I think everybody knows with inflation, everybody's evaluation is going to be going up. And how that's going to look district-wide, how does your house compare to my house? That will all come out in the end, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're going to see on your taxes for the school district.
Yeah.
And so the way this works is I'm just here to have conversations about our preliminary levy tonight. And then at the end of September, I'll come back and I'll ask you to approve the preliminary levy. Just like every other year, I will be asking you to approve the maximum to allow the state to make any other adjustments to calculations. And even in our meeting on Friday, they recommended that to make sure that you as business managers are talking to your board, that you do approve the maximum to allow that extra time to ensure that we are getting every last penny that we deserve as a district. And then I come back in that first meeting in December to shore it all up, tie it up, put a little bow on it, and we move forward from there.
Yeah, I think I remember in a different conversation, it's the home valuation that drives that, but it's also a major change in the homestead exemption. When I look at my own property tax, it's actually the home, it's the decrease in the property tax exemption that drives the taxable property value almost more than the actual increase in the valuation. It's something in the formula. I'm sure Pat Garofalo or somebody can speak more intelligently to that than I was, but it was an eye-opener. When folks are concerned about property taxes increasing so wildly, it's those two components more than it is the county, the city, or the school district driving tax decisions. So it's complicated and it's interesting.
Yep.
Anyway. If there's no other questions, thank you. I guess we can move on to the next topic, which is, get back to my agenda.
Refund?
Yeah, this interesting, the refunding of the 2014 A bonds.
Yeah, so it wasn't
I
that
think
many.
that's refunding, not refunding.
Yep. So it wasn't that many years ago, I was coming to the board all the time about refunding our bonds. And so what happens is we currently have about 8 bonds that are out there. Some of them are callable or refundable, some of them are not. All of them have been approved by our voters unless it says in statute that we don't have to go to the voters for approval. We do have one, and it has to do with our OPEB, our other post-employee benefits. There was a small window given to every district in the state of Minnesota that you could go out and put bonds to help with that liability, which we did. And again, like I had mentioned, just remember, bonds are for buildings, levies are for learning. And so what we're talking about tonight is refunding our 2014 A bonds. They originally started out as our 2005 bonds, which were for the high school. The high school was broken up into 2 different bonds. And it originally was, I think, like 81 million when it was originally issued. Then we refunded it in 2014 for roughly 71 million. And now we're coming forward, bringing that forward to refund it one more time for roughly about $43.5 million. And the structure would be very similar in having it being paid off in 2027. And if everything goes like we're thinking it will, potentially could save the taxpayers $1.6 million. And the way that you would see those savings is similar to way a person would see savings when they refinance their home, right? It's not in the principal, because you owe the principal, it is what it is, but the savings you see are in the interest yield that you would have on your house or on these bonds. And so the way that this is work here, to have a conversation, make sure everybody understands why we're doing it, answer any questions. At the end of this September, I'd bring a resolution forward for you to approve, saying that I can work with Ellers to get all of the documents together to get the bond out for bid. I'd come back at the end of October. Typically what happens is we close bids the morning of that last meeting in October, and then we bring forward that night the winner of the refunding, and you approve it. 2-3 weeks later, it's all wrapped up and done with.
So this isn't a change in the term, so the payoff date, if it's 2027, it's still 2027. There's just a change it's literally a change in the interest.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Now, we do have the option, and we might, depending upon some other decisions that we make, to restructure it if it's to our benefit.
That would be a term decision. Okay.
Yep. And so we'll take a look at it as things are coming in, if this is the path that the board decides. So I don't want to say it's going to be exactly, because something might come up where we're looking at other things that we're going to be talking about, where it might be favorable to do X instead of Y or something like that. But currently, we're looking at the same structure, same payout in 2027.
It's interesting. Interest rates elsewhere are going up, and we're
Yeah.
having an opportunity to see a savings, so that's interesting.
Yeah, it has to do with the bond premium that they're seeing out in the market at this time, so.
Great. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks, Jane. Our next topic is Finance and Long Range Planning Committee update.
So, kind of to summarize before Jane shows the PowerPoint, because that was really going to tell you the true story of what's going on. So how did we get to the PowerPoint is the story. So I want to say back in August is probably when you got the spreadsheet, is that correct? Or
The model.
a model?
Yep.
So the model that she built is a month and a half old that we received. So again, she's been putting data in that. So what it is, it's a huge spreadsheet. It has a bunch of formulas on it. And during the meetings, we had to determine what the parameters were. So we sat down and discussed as a group to bring to the board what were some key parameters. Like, for example, enrollment's a huge role in this. So we had to determine, looking at two different spreadsheets, and determine what we felt was best to bring forward to the board on what the enrollment number was going to be based on Teamworks and what Ellers had, I believe was the other group on that. So we kind of came up with that. The other factor is the gen ed formula, like Jane spoke to, keeping the expenditures at a certain percentage. The other one, again, the fund balance, as a board, I think we need to determine, you know, the parameters on that. Are we going to use some? Are we going to take some? How much? We're not going to touch it. I don't know. The other part of this was building in contract settlements. So we got to determine what percentage we want to put of contracts on that. And the other part of that is high health cost insurance, because that's the other factor we got to put in on that. Staffing was another parameter we built in, as well as referendum dollars. And there is I know we didn't share that, but do you remember the documentation where you showed where it would drop off? Oh, you do have that?
I
He's
can
got
have
it.
it. You want
Okay.
me to show it?
Well, I mean, I think it'd be great for the board to see how to me, it was a good visual impact, and for taxpayers to see where it does drop off in case we decide to go for a referendum or levy on that.
Yeah, so Jane had talked about this, and this Steve's talking about. So this is our debt, right? And you can see based on, you know, kind of our payment process and when things are paid off, we have two big steps coming up in the next, 2030, in the next, 9 years. So with a big drop off in 2024, 25, and then another big drop off in 2027, 28, which is, you know, all things being equal, it's a relief to the taxpayers in some way, shape, or form. So we, in our conversations as a committee, talked about, you know, is there a way to leverage possibly that, you know, as we talk about different options and things. So we took into account and looked at some potentially different ways, and we're still working with Ellers on a few different ways to potentially maybe structure some things. But how do we, you know, maybe use this to, you know, make things better in terms of maybe generating additional revenue, but also having minimal to very little impact on taxpayers. So,
Because it'd be offset through this.
And I
for
think
taxpayers.
that's something, you know, again, when we talk to the public about it or whatever, I think that's a powerful picture to show on that. So with all this information, then we came up with originally 5 scenarios, and we kind of talked it down to 3 scenarios that Jane put forward to bring tonight to the board. Some other questions that I kind of brought up that I think we do need to discuss as a group, and brought up during the finance committee meeting. Again, we got to sit here and decide, do we need a referendum or levy? Do we need both a technology levy or an operating levy? Can we look at doing one or the other? Can we look at doing both? And again, I'm not going to take away your thunder. She has very good discretion on explaining this. How much do we want to touch with the fund balance? You know, we have X $1 million there, and we said we have between 8 and 12%. I think we're at about 8.7,
We're about 9.
about 9%.
Yeah.
So do we want to drop that down? Do we use, so we have $1 million for the iPads for technology, you know, that we could use for this. Do we leave it sit for the iPads, or do we use this as part of the factor? Should we have, and the other thing that I was kind of talking to Jason about is, should we have a list of things, say we're cutting, I'm just going to arbitrarily make this dollar amount out because I'm not going to say it's the specific amount, $5 million cut. So if we're going to make a $5 million cut, what are we going to cut and why? What's the impact of the classroom? So again, if we have to go out and ask the public, we got to understand what the impact is to the classroom and how much that would be. So have a discussion about that. Again, look at our wants and needs as a district. What do we want? What do we need? And the biggest thing on this people need to understand is this is a forecast. It's always a moving target daily, to Jane's point. And one question I asked that we can't answer, at least at this point, you know, in every forecast there's a fudge factor. You know, can it be 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%? At this time, I know we can't even come up with what a fudge factor even looks like, because we got to put all the numbers in, you have to determine what direction we're going to go. But I will tell you, it's a powerful tool that we do have, that you can see everything that's going on within the district financially. And I think it's going to help us, you know, move forward as a district in the future, because we can forecast the next 5 years, but people need to understand we got to keep changing the data in it and keep up with that and keep communicating the community on that. But it's pretty good. It's a pretty powerful tool. So that was my update going into the presentation. So Jane has pretty much the 3 scenarios on that will explain everything that, you know, kind of what I said. But if you guys have questions for me or for Jacqueline.
I think let's continue.
All right. All right, so I'm going to start off, and then Jason's going to take over the enrollment stuff, and then he'll pass the ball back to me. So I think one of the important things that Steve already touched on is that we have to remember this is a model and a plan. It is not a projection of what's going to happen to the district at this point in time, right? It is based off of a set of assumptions that we made in our finance committee to try to figure out where we potentially could be in a couple of years. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. It's a plan, it's a model based on a set of assumptions.
And just to add to that, I think to Steve's point, because we did talk about, you know, he asked the question, you know, like, what's the fudge factor in this? And Jane about fell over because she's like, well, I'm not comfortable asking. Because a majority of the things that we put in, we don't have control over. mean, that's just the reality, but when it comes to school funding, right? And when you have very little control over it, there's lots of things that can change. And even, you know, we're gonna have, we'll start some conversations about, you know, next school year.
23-24.
23-24, kind of at the end of this and really hone in the October work session, because we'll have a better idea about our enrollment, because it's usually pretty close to, there's no magic thing about the October 1st date. People think there is, that's really only about our sped numbers, but it's just kind of a magic date that we use, but it holds pretty true to the end of the year. So that'll give us a lot better data to figure out, all right, for 23-24, but there's just so many unknowns. It's a budgeting year at the state level. You know, we can kind of get an idea between 1% and 2% probably. You know, they still have a surplus left over. Do they do something with that? Do they not do something with that? You know, there's just lots of things that go into it that are really, really hard to predict, and can change things. You know, we made the decision and talked to the board about, you know, taking the risk of, yeah, we're gonna get something from the surplus, and lo and behold, we thought we were being conservative at $500,000 and we were wrong. And so how do you try not to make those mistakes, but also, you know, don't sound out every alarm bell and things like that. It's not easy. So one of the things that we did want to do was just give a brief enrollment update. We have been working with TeamWorks International. That's Dennis Cheeseborough and his group. They do an analytics thing, and it's been really, really good. It's an ongoing, continuing process, but they've spent time over the summer and provided us some initial findings. And I think last year, even when we were talking about our budget and our deficit last year and kind of enrollment impacting that, a lot of people go, well, to the pandemic. Well, the reality is, when we showed kind of that chart last year, I think if you remember, we started to see a decline in our enrollment in the elementaries even prior to it. Now, it was more like a dribble, you know, not something that you would really, you know, 25 kids, 30 kids, and then obviously what happened during the pandemic accelerated that. But when they started digging in and doing some things, it made sense.
When I previewed this on Thursday, when you sent the first draft out, it could have knocked me over with a feather. I mean, birth rate declining 28.6% since 2010 in this area just shocks. It's shocking.
Well, like I said, when we met with Dennis the first time we went over the preliminary stuff, we were kind of like, yeah, we feel something. And then when we looked at that too, it made more sense about what we were seeing. And because Jane works really hard to try to get a handle on our enrollment. It's the most important thing that we do. And even when the pandemic was going on, we were off. And it was like, how do we keep getting off? Well, when we saw the decline in birth rates, then it was like, well, no wonder why. There's not kids around. I mean, like there was before. So that decline, you know, 28.6%, and that's not just, you know, that's across the state of Minnesota, right? That's across our nation. That's something that's in there, but that has a huge impact. So when we're looking at, you know, that high of 608, you know, in 2010 to now 434, think about that as your kindergarten class. And we have a wave going through, but school districts have financial issues when their graduating classes are bigger than their kindergarten classes. That is a recipe for disaster.
So that's the number of kids born in the area that may be offset by kids that move into the area. So you may not have experienced a drop exactly in those numbers because
there's some of that holding.
But the trend line is very clear.
There's some of that holding on, and that's kind of what we get to at the end of kind of their projection for us. So you can see, you know, in that time, we have grown as a district, but again, when you start to dig into, it hasn't been at our elementary. That's where we've seen that decline and that number of birth rates going down coming through. Our middle school and our high school specifically have grown the most, but that's from that peak of, you know, 2013, 14, our P5s, those are kids getting ready for kindergarten. Our peak was 607. And then after that, it was declining. So we are riding the crest of the wave. Actually, it's into middle school now because I think our sixth graders dropped this year for the first time, which again, will just remind people from a school funding standpoint, our 7th through 12th graders generate 1.2 of what the state gives us. So when you start to lose kids in your secondary, it's kind of a double whammy because you lose that part, and we're starting to see that a little bit in our 6th grade. Now, based on the developments that are currently in our boundaries, they're projecting if 100% of those developments are housed and come to fruition, that we could gain about 1,500 students. So they're saying about 700 at the elementary, about 370 at the middle school, and about 580 at the high school. Now, the key is if 100% of those come to be. And really, basically, you know, their projections are saying is that we will grow and begin to grow as a district, because that will, in the future, not right now, offset the decline that we're seeing in the birth rate. But the key to that is if 100% of those things are built out. And we already know that, right, the economy's changing a little bit and things like that. So when it comes to some of the enrollment things that the committee did, we didn't go to the high point and say, hey, this is awesome, we're gonna go, let's kind of plan off of this. We did some kind of refiguring, and Jane can talk about that. I think the other thing that it's important for people to understand in our community, especially when we talk about impact of taxes, you look at the sale price of a single family home, so it's almost gone up 30%. So the average single family home now in the district is $366,000. So home values have gone up, which is a good thing for homeowners, but it has other impacts as well, property taxes and things like that. So we wanted to, I know we shared this with the board, but we wanted to put this in a more public forum and give people that are interested that, because we do, I mean, even us, we've driven around and be like, look at all the houses coming up, and that's good news. But the problem on the bottom side of it is we don't have as many kids coming up through a more traditional manner. And so the question becomes will the developments offset that, or will the developments overtake that throughout the process? So.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and the other thing is, as other developments come online and are approved, they're updating this all the time, so we can get updated information and things like that quickly. So, you know, to Steve's point, you know, when you know, every couple of months or whatever it is, we look to maybe update our model, we can have that information and reevaluate what we want to do with the enrollment piece of things, so.
Can their data get as precise as scoping that out over the 10 years? So I know the cumulative over the 10 years, it says about 1543. Can they do it?
We could ask them, that's not what they shared with us. They kind of shared just the projection part of the things and stuff
Okay.
like that,
Yeah,
so.
I wasn't sure if they had the timing of each development, if they could get more approximate, say,
Yeah.
in smaller buckets of time.
No, but I think that's something, because we can go in and they actually provided us kind of a capture rate for areas, and it's based on price of house and things like that. So I think we could probably dig in a little bit more, or with their help, as some of these come on and grow out, maybe figure that out.
Okay.
And stuff.
And so we just wanted to remind the board what our current fund balance policy is. It's policy 714, and it is 8 to 12% of the district general ed operating expenditures. And we've been there for the last several years. And, you know, as a finance person, I hope we can stay there, but I also know, you know, sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures, and we need to do what's best for our students. So we need to keep that in mind. So as we start to look at the first scenario, me personally, I titled this scenario, "The Sky is Falling." Because what we want to try to do to set up the board is for you to understand the progress that we went through to set the foundation of some other decisions that we have coming down the line, and what decisions we make and how it impacts the district. And so this really is, the sky is falling, meaning we're not getting anything from the state on our Jet Ed formula. We're doing 0% increases on our
And
contracts.
that's, I got to break you, because
Yep.
on that one alone, is that?
Yep.
Because when we've gone through a couple of these discussions, there's like the salary increase percentage, then there's the total cost of the contract. Is this the latter, the total cost of the contract,
For the 2%?
or the 0% increase on all
Oh,
contracts?
yeah, that would be,
That
that
means
we
We
would,
motioned for 0, there was
Yep.
no increase on anything else. I
Right.
mean, it's really
it's 0.
flatlined.
It's flatlined.
Okay.
Yep. And then like we've used in previous conversations, the 4.62% on all other expenditures, that's your supplies, your electricity, your utilities, all of that good stuff.
Jane, I know
Yep.
that's been the average. Does that number still reflect all the inflationary costs that we've talked about already?
Well,
Do you feel like it's gonna be more?
once our 21-22 school year audit is complete,
You'll know
then,
better.
because I didn't want to put that in there without it being audited
Mm-hmm.
unless there's in case there's a big fluctuation. I want to make sure the numbers are finalized before we change an average.
But wasn't there an inflationary line item that we could put in there? I thought I saw one in when you originally showed us that
Yep.
huge.
Yep, and so that's all of these different percentages. So that, the 4.62 is the cost that each will increase every year from whenever you put it in.
Right.
So, yeah, we can put it on salaries, we can put it on benefits, and so what we're saying is, this 4.62 doesn't deal with salary and benefits, this is just all of the other stuff that is increasing by 4.62%.
And you can see it very well on the spreadsheet. It makes a lot more sense visually seeing that.
In the model?
Yep, yep.
And as we've been talking with the board before in previous meetings, we know that our referendum is good through the 24-25 school year. And so what we're saying is that it's unsuccessful. We are unable to revoke, replace, or renew it. So literally, the sky is just coming crashing down. As we look at the enrollment, like Steve and Jason have said,
You're optimistic a little bit.
yep. So the enrollment, like Steve and Jason have said, we spent a good amount of time talking about this to really come up with a number that we feel comfortable with, but also doesn't put us in a position where we're overestimating. We would rather underestimate than overestimate, because if you overestimate, you're in a world of hurt, right? You got to make cuts on the fly. And at least if you're underestimating, I mean, obviously you don't want to do it so bad that you're devastating the district. So we really tried to take that medium approach of what we think our enrollment is going to be, looking at all of the different models and enrollment numbers and projections that we had in front of us. And so what we used in all three scenarios is for the 22-23, which we did bring to the board and was approved, was a 67-25. And then for 23-24, currently, we're saying we're going to go down 25 students. And then from there on out, we used a number of and growing 25 students per year. And that kind of takes into consideration the information that we received from the TeamWorks model that we got, that we are going to start to see growth again as our developments come online. Now, again, if all of a sudden those developments don't come, then we got to revisit our enrollment numbers. But so these were the assumptions that we used for the very first scenario.
Can I just interrupt, Ron? Sorry. So we did budget on 6725. I shared with the board in Friday notes that as of Tuesday, the first day of school, we were at 6756, so we're a little above that. But we also know that kind of through the first couple weeks of school, we do quote-unquote lose kids. Mainly what it is they've already moved and we finally get the paperwork and things like that. So back to what I said earlier, once we get to October, we may look at this and say, okay, you know, we're still above 6725, so maybe next year we don't want to go to 6700, we want to go to something else. So, but just to be safe, that's what we did. So this will be more fluid here.
And scenario one, Jane, did not factor in, like the others, the budget reductions for
Correct.
23, 24. This is
Correct.
just.
The sky is falling.
Leave it as is, okay.
Yep. So kind of just to give you an idea where we're starting from, if ground zero, right? We're going to start at ground zero, and then we're going to start walking out, is the approach that we kind of wanted to give for
We
everybody.
thought it'd be better to see that the sky is falling, so you have that start point.
Yeah, we haven't made,
Actually,
we've
I
made no
didn't.
decisions on expenditure.
They did, so they outvoted me.
I'm probably jumping ahead with the line
That's
item on that next slide, the fund balance. Is that just the unassigned fund balance? Is
That's
there-
all fund balances.
All fund balance, thank you.
Yep, all fund balance, yep. So as we go to the next slide, you can see for 23, 24, we end up roughly with $5.8 million in the red. And you can see as it extrapolates out in the next years, we go to 8 million, then we go to 9.7 million, and then we go to $11.6 million.
And just so everybody understands, so the projected 23, 24, that's a deficit of 5.8 million.
Right.
Now, again, right, there's different ways of handling that, and so you can simply reduce that, which would mean you'd be looking at budget cuts of that amount, or
Go to fund balance.
you could do different things. And so I know we talked to, in Hannah, a little bit about, words and stuff and trying to make sure that people understand that the deficit is the deficit, that's the gap. Now, how you align that can be all reductions, it could be all fund balance, and it can be a combination of both. And that's why we've used the word
Yeah, but that's-
alignment. I don't know if that's the right
Yep.
word or not, but I know in conversations, I just want to make sure people understand, this is saying a $6 million deficit.
Under,
So-
yep.
But you can call this guy and falling, but you can also call it control group, right?
Yep,
Yep.
yep. So does anyone have any questions on that scenario before we go to the next one?
And to Jane's point, the reason too that we had talked about that referendum dropping off is if we don't do anything, it will drop off. It's done after the 10 years.
Right.
And so, and if we were to go out to voters in 24, 25, right? That's when in
November of '24.
Yeah, November 20, I get all the things. No, and it wasn't approved,
Oh, that's
right?
November 25.
Yeah, see, I But if we go out when it ends, so it kicks in,
Right.
it's the same scenario, right? It either runs out or is not voter approved. This is kind of the trail it takes you down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, if we have conversations and we decide as a board to go out November of '23, we actually can go out for 3 years in a row, right? November of '23 could be our revoke and replace. November of '24 is our first year that we can go out to renew our current. And then November of '25 would be like our last ditch effort, we have to pass it or it goes away. So kind of give you a picture of how that might play out. Okay?
And some communities, it typically, the questions have appeared as part of the general election, but communities can call a special election if needed, right?
So I
Or some
believe
govern-
if it's a levy, we have to do it during the regular election.
Okay.
If it is a bond, there's certain dates that you can do that. I believe there's spring.
There's 5 dates.
Oh, there's 5 days.
Yep, and then if you do a capital projects levy, so if we decide to do that instead of operating, that does not have to be in November. That can be on the 5 different days as well.
But the general operating
But the
one that we've-
referendum part
that
of
we've
it
always done is
Yeah.
part
Has
of
to
the
be
general
November.
election.
has to be part of in November.
Yep, we don't have a choice.
I've got a dumb question. On the revenue line, the numbers actually don't go down that much. It's like from 2022, 23 projected to 89.3 million to projected 23, 24, 86.4 million. I mean, it's $5 million. Is that really, that's what our operating levy pulls, about 5 million? Okay.
Yep,
Good question, though.
And I think Kyle, to your question too, if you look at 22, 23 to 23, 24, you see a drop of like $3 million there. I believe that's the federal funds, am I correct, Jane? So that's the offset that we've used for the last couple of years. So that's why there's a bigger drop in your revenue, and you'll see that in all of those.
So not to punctuate a point we've probably had a few different times, but that's the special education cross subsidy. I mean, that's the impact when we talk about the deficit we're in right now.
8.1 million.
Right, so it more than covers our property tax revenues or operating levy.
Most certainly, you
Yeah.
could frame it up the
Yeah.
fact that our taxpayers are paying half of the bill
Federal
the state
government's
should
up.
be paying.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, I think you were saying the COVID dollars, the federal funds that we got, that we kept us from making cuts we may have otherwise made in the last couple years, just under normal circumstances, got us through so that we could maintain homeostasis during that time.
And that's why you see the revenue drop, because then to Kyle's point, it gets to 86 and it kind of stays right there. But it goes from 89 to 86 and 22, 23 to 23, 24, because that's, your point, Hannah, that's the federal dollars that are dropping out.
Thanks.
So then our next scenario, I phrased, are we there yet? So this is,
When did you give these names?
Because I was-
I know, but you didn't share them with us.
well, because I was sitting there trying to help people understand like the different processes, the 3 different scenarios, so they could
I
relate
like
to
it.
them.
I just would have been like,
She's always
a surprise.
Like we're on an episode of Mad Men.
So this one, we used assumptions of 1.5 and 1.5 on the jet end formula. And over the last, I'd say 7 to 10 years, 7 to 8 years, we have seen that average. So that's pretty conservative, you know, mainstream where we should be. 2% increase on the contracts. Our typical 4.62 on all of our other expenditures. And this referendum of 412 per pupil, now know that is on top of what we currently have. So it's in addition to what we currently have. And the way that we came up with that number, just so you kind of have an idea, so we have been working with Ellers on different scenarios on how we could maybe go out for a levy. What does it look like if it's a tech levy? What does it look like if it's an operating levy? What are the advantages? What are the different disadvantages? Who gets taxed what, all of those things. And so one of the first things we talked about was a capital projects levy. And we asked them, like, how much capital projects levy can we go out for and basically have like a 0 impact? You know, there's gonna be some nominal impact to some taxpayers, but what is that gonna be? Right? So they came back to us with like $3.124 million in a capital projects levy. And then at the same time, we're like, okay, so what does that look like on a per pupil basis for an operating? And that's where that 412 came from. Now, know that a capital projects levy is based on net tax capacity, and an operating is based on referendum market value. So they do have different impacts on different groups of homeowners within our district. But that's where the 412 came from and why we chose to use that.
and to Jane's point, we did talk about a capital projects levy, which is kind of referred to as a tech levy. We, as a committee, kind of threw that one to the side because we could get to a point where this $412 additional per pupil was kind of tax neutral. It generates an additional $3 million. The problem is it's a bucket for capital, and you would need to be able to find $3 million in your general fund that you could code to here. And we don't think we have enough. So yes, it would support some of the things that we're already doing, but it doesn't help our general fund. So we just kind of put it off to the side.
I asked Jane this clarifying question because as we talked a lot towards the end of last year, the capital budgets, right, that have been at 50% reduction over the last couple of years, including band and some of the other, by building just across the board, that's not enough. And
Right.
so I'll let you explain, but that helped me understand that we couldn't restore those to their full, the rate at which they were funded by doing this levy because of coding.
Statute.
Yeah. Coding
Yeah,
limitations.
so even though it says a capital tech levy, really it's a tech levy, like Jason said, that it has to be tech expenditures. And a lot of the expenditures that are in capital aren't related to technology whatsoever. And so even though they're capital, they're not tech. So you can't code those to a tech levy. It truly has to be technology related. And though we probably could, like the first year, if we want $3 million, but in the long run, it won't be sustainable for us to find that much relief in our operating, like Jason has said.
And it's actually you know, you look at the 7-county metro area, almost, I'm not gonna say, well, yeah, almost all of them have a referendum because the state just doesn't fund the way it is, so all districts are going out to taxpayers in some way, shape, or form. And then they almost all have a tech levy. Now, the good news for our district is we've supported devices for 10+ years through the funding that we currently have and have never had to ask for
So
that.
you're saying they're doing both?
They're doing
Yeah,
both.
I could, I mean,
Most districts.
Do you have that
do you want me
one?
to pull up?
Do you have
I
the
can-
yellow one?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course I do. I can't see, sorry. So this
We're
is
at
the,
the
so
low end
you
of
can see this. So we got this from Ellers, right? So this is just kind of, and it gives you an idea of, so the orange is referendum, so that's excess. And then the blue is tech levy, so above and beyond that. So highlighted are just our neighboring districts, so you can kind of see. So like Burnsville generates an additional $1,800 per student and another $462 for technology.
This
You know,
is currently.
Yes,
Okay.
yep. Rosemont, Appa Valley, Egan, 1,600, and then 217 for technology. Shakopee just passed one. They're at 1,200, 473. Lakeville's at 1,400, 229. Hastings is just straight referendum at 14. And then Prior Lake's at 624, straight referendum, and we're at 552.
Yeah, we're in like the bottom 7 of it compared to other districts for our voter-approved authority and how much we've asked so far. And I think that's a testament to the financial discipline that the district has shown and just how lean we have been running for districts of similar size and student enrollment to be able to maintain our operations at the level that we have, including our programming to the extent we have, is really something that
When I think to the earlier question with Chris and Lisa up here around, because, you know, we did boardwalks and we talked about instructional coaches and things like that. I mean, the reality is that, I understand it, but that is how districts are able to fund
So much more.
those additional coaches and things like that and stuff. And it'd be great, you know, we've been able to do the technology part of things because it's capital, but you can't take your capital and use it for people anyway. So sometimes people, well, you got this, you know, you don't need those, you can, no, they don't, you can't even mix them.
Right.
So, but that, so again, that gives you a little bit of an idea of that, of
Yeah,
what things
we
are.
have this conversation about property taxes all the time. Everyone recognizes that our community is different than most communities. 196 and 194 both have large industrial bases and industrial parks that finance a lot of different things for their city. Farmington and most of 55024 is, I mean, even on the Lakeville side, and that probably doesn't affect a whole lot, but especially on the Farmington side, it's almost all residential. And so, yeah, I mean, to Hannah's point, there's been strong recognition and respect for that impact or the potential impact before, you know, going out to voters asking for more. And that's,
And again, just,
but
when 2014, when the district went out, right, it was with the idea to get through 10 years. And again, I mean, we firmly believe we would have gotten through 10 years, you know, without the pandemic and all the different things that hit. That stuff's out of our control. But, you know, I mean, I live in Farmington. I understand the impact. I understand, you know, that sort of thing. And we've tried to be really good at, you know, asking for enough to make us be able to do the things that we want to do, but, you know, not, crazy is not the right word, but, you know, figure out what that level is that we can do to support the things that we want to support and not try to go above and beyond that, so.
can you share, I don't think we'd had that other, the bar graph. Can you share that with us?
It's in Friday.
It is in front of you, so I didn't see that part. I read everything else.
It's linked in there, but yes, actually I have all of this. I can send them out separately. I was going to do that too, so.
The other thing to note that's different in this scenario is that we do have budget reductions of 4.4 million. And when we get to the screen, I'll explain why we came up with that number. Again, our enrollment is the same in all 3 scenarios.
Yeah, the other thing I note on this and scenario 3 is the 2% increase in all contracts is not something I think I've seen, right, in our recent, so that's actually a very, very conservative
Yep,
assumption, right?
yep, yep. And so as we look at this for 23, 24, the reason that we picked the 4.4 million is that it leaves approximately $2 million in the red for that year. And we figured, or we're assuming that the board would want to use the remaining assigned fund balance to negate that and come up with a zero balanced budget. And so that's why there was the $4.4 million. Now that 4.4 does roll each year, because once you make the cut, you know, it's not coming back. It wasn't just, we're cutting it for 23, 24, and then adding it back. It rolls forward for each one of those years.
And what percentage would that take us down to then if we took it from,
No, so the 2 million was out of the assigned, not unassigned. So if we
so
take
we're
that
still-
two
We haven't touched that
we're
yet.
still sitting at
in,
8.5?
yeah, so we,
So you set it up, right? So the bottom line's gonna stay at 8%?
yes. But no, so, oh, no, okay, so what you gotta understand in that model is when, and it's not on here, just so you know, so this is a different, so there's, in the model, you're able to say what you want your fund balance to be, okay? And so we assumed that it was gonna be 8%. That's what we decided, because that's the minimum for our.
Policy.
Yep. And so then what it does, and it's further down on this spreadsheet, I didn't want to attach it all because it's a lot of numbers. It will tell you how far above or below you are of that 8% fund balance. So you can use that going, oh, now we're short $1.5 million. So let's put in, you know, reductions of 1.5 million. Oh, now we're right at where we're supposed to be. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in that spreadsheet and play with to see where you end up overall.
But
But
when we bring it to the 8%, I guess is my question on that. Because we're at, what did you say, 8 point?
we're almost at 9, yeah.
So that 1% is roughly how much?
Wow.
I was gonna say about 800, it
Yeah.
wasn't a million, I know, it was
Yeah.
about 800,000? Okay.
Yeah,
But the problem too, right, that's based off your expenditures?
Yeah.
So as your expenditures increase, even though.
chasing it.
Yeah.
right.
So,
And that was based up for last year, right? So this year, when it's finalized, even if our fund balance doesn't change,
It could be down.
the
it could,
percent,
the percent, oh, it could be down to 8% already. Because if we don't add anything to it, it could already be down to 8%.
but if I'm right, Jane, if I look at that bottom row, the fund balance, that
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't change other than the assigned, the 2 million assigned that we were using for 22, 24, correct?
In 23, 24, it's just the assigned fund balance. You can see that $20 million is all fund balances, right? Assigned, unassigned, doesn't matter what we said it was for, wasn't for. And that just keeps track of where you end up.
Okay.
Okay? Scenario 3,
Is this Candyland?
you know what I said?
What?
Rounding third. We're rounding third, right?
Playing baseball.
Gotta keep it interesting. Right, because people don't like numbers, so you gotta make fun somehow. So anyways, so as we look at our third scenario, this has a lot of the same variables that we used in scenario 2. The one that I do want to point out is the fourth one down, referendum of, and it actually should be 660. I got kind of happy with the sixes. But anyway, so you might go, well, I know. Why did you pick that number? So when we were working through all of these scenarios with Ellers, you know, with the capital projects, and that's how we got the 412, then they're like, well, what do you think, what would be another number that you'd want to look at? And we just said $5 million. The 660 represents that $5 million. And so that's what we used in this third scenario. And as you look at the breakout, again, 23, 24, we're still doing the 4.4 reductions. You can still see that $2 million, assuming that we would make those or we would use our assigned fund balance. But you can see for 24, 25, $36,000, that's a break-even budget, right? And then for 25, 26, it goes back up to 2.2, and then it goes up to 4.9. So what we tried to do is stage it out so you can see, based on these assumptions and variables, where we land as a district.
So there's, sorry, Jane.
No, go ahead.
So the 1 year, the 24, 25, where it's the balanced budget, then it goes down again?
Yep, because your expenditures are growing faster than your enrollment. Well, in your enrollment and your revenue generated, right? Because you're only getting 1.5% on your Gen Ed formula. And that's why you'll hear a lot of times districts when, you know, the legislature gives us 2%, which we're very thankful for, so I'm never not thankful for it. But it's about, do you realize our average expenditures go up 4.62? So the 2 is great, but each year we're still going back 2.62% each year. So.
Or another way to look at it too is your special education costs go up, you know, 2 and, you know, 1% is what, $1 million?
Yep.
1% is $1 million. That may cover it.
So before we get into, you know, deep conversation, just a couple other things. You know, Hannah already stepped on it a little bit about the COVID funds, that we have been very fortunate and very thankful for the federal government and the funds that we have received for them. Most of those dollars do end in June of 2024. We will more than likely have, I would say, 98% of them spent by June of 23.
It's coming June.
So.
Does these account for the steps when debt's falling off? Because I know in the assumptions at the end, you talk about debt falling off in 27, 28, but there was another couple steps before you got to that.
Yeah,
So do these account for that in the
So what you have to remember, debt is in Fund 7, right? This we're talking about is in our general fund.
Okay.
So that is, when we get to this slide here is, you know, consideration for estimates. I'll just drop down to the bottom. Our projection model doesn't go out to 27, 28, but we do have that big step in 27, 28 where we could recapture about $740 per pupil.
That was 24, 25, or
We already have that one, which that takes into consideration that 412 and the 660 that we already have built in. Okay, and then our second step happens in the 27, 28, their fiscal year 28. And that's where, if we were, right, semi break even, keep households, you know, semi, you know, $0, it's roughly about $742 per pupil. So, you know, things just to remember to keep in mind when we're talking about this model, and for everybody to understand, this can change, and you change one variable and it totally changes the outlook. And so that's really important for,
it looks like a great exercise. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it totally changes the outlook. So, you know, if you have enrollment growth or decline, any of your contracts, agreements, increases, you know, special education is always a factor, right? Because those are mandates, and if the funding doesn't come along with it, it really can hurt a district. Any changes in federal or state funding, health insurance costs, we all know that those are going up, and if they keep going up the way that they do, you know, it's going to be tough for everybody. And of course, the one we always like to talk about in education is always the unfunded mandates. You know, the legislature puts in things that they don't give us any money for, but we have to follow. That really hurts districts as well. So I think for tonight, you know, it's to get an understanding, some direction from the board. What do you like? What don't you like? What do you want to see more of? Get a better understanding of? Because in the long run, our first goal would be in October, hopefully to get a target from the board of what we're looking at for reductions.
For just the next upcoming year.
For 23, 24, correct. Yep,
Understanding that these have used the 4.4 million
Yep.
as part of the modeling.
yep,
But yeah, I think that's an important piece to call out too, just because recognizing that it's something that we have to plan for because the legislature last year did not do anything, and so we have to plan accordingly because our budget has to be done at a certain time. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's what will happen come. I mean,
Yeah,
but
but
we,
should
as a
proce-
board,
we
have
should
to
proceed forward
plan.
as if it is going
We
to
have to plan as though it is because we don't know, and
Okay.
And then our suggestion too would be kind of parallel conversations. We know that regardless of anything, we're coming up towards the tail end of our referendum and having discussions about when and if the board would like to go out and, you know, are we just gonna renew it? Well, if the board wants to just renew that, we can only do that in a certain time frame. If the board is interested in looking at some of those steppings and potentially, you know, using those to not have any tax impact, but to increase additional revenue, we could do that earlier. And then to the third part, and I think Kyle, you were talking about this, and even take a more stepped-in approach and step in, and we wouldn't even know how to write this, but we'd get some help, but step in one early on, and then when that second drops off, you can see you'd have the opportunity to generate an additional, you know, $740 per pupil with minimal tax impact and stuff. And so then you'd be, you know, you'd be looking at what we currently have is about 400 or 500, we'll just say 500, and then potentially another 900. I mean, you know, you could be looking at 1,600, and you know, it goes from $5 million to, Jane's gonna hate this, but.
That's fine. While he's figuring that out, you may be wondering, well, why don't we do a little operating and capital or tech levy all in one question? You can't. We were really hoping that that would be something that we could do, but because of the tax base, you can't ask, since they're two different tax bases, you can't ask them in one question. They'd have to be asked in two separate questions. So.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, right, you could maybe generate, you know, right now it's about 5 million. This is a very rough estimate, another 11 million. You know, it's a different conversation about,
And Jane, you're saying we have to ask it in two questions and we don't want to ask it in two questions?
We can, that's just so what we were trying to hope, right, is just ask one question. Get it all done with just one question.
But you can't, you gotta ask two.
Yeah, if we want to do an operating and a tech levy, we have to ask two questions. We can't ask it in one.
and our thought would be is, it will be very hard to function without an operating levy. We've proven we can function without a capital levy,
The tech levy,
the tech levy.
because that was gonna be my next question. Do we need the tech levy?
Well, so if you think about it, anytime that you can generate additional dollars for the districts, it's always beneficial. I mean, I would never turn away money for the district, right?
Right.
But the difference between the two, right, when you're prioritizing, we need
Correct,
the operating.
correct.
It would be very nice to have the tech, because that also alleviates other general fund expenditures. But we need one, and we want one, would probably.
It's the want and need.
Well,
Yeah.
the reality is the most beneficial one would be a tech levy because of the way that it's structured. It has the least amount of tax impact on our homeowners. It's based on households, not students. But again, we don't have enough general fund, now, because $3 million, we don't have enough. Now, if you're saying $1 million, we could find $1 million, but in the grand scheme of things, $1 million doesn't do anything to our general fund. To Jane's point, that would be nice to have.
Yeah, and I think too, when I think about the number of questions here, I mean, as a voter, as a taxpayer, I mean, just keeping it simple. And it sounds like, oh, there's tax levy, now there's an operating levy, now there's when I hear the objections to levies going on across the state right now, it's about the number. And, sorry, the number of questions, because it's actually harder and more, it makes the district look less financially responsible, I think, sometimes, when there's so many different we want more money, we want more money, we want more money. But really, if we can ask that in one honest, solid question, you know, every 10 years, that's an ideal state. And in
that what our
reflection of
last
the
one was?
stability,
One?
right?
Our last one?
It was 2 because we did the bond at the same
Yeah.
time.
Well,
There was, yeah, you
So
did
there
the
were two,
classrooms.
there was 2 questions, but it was building and learning.
Yeah.
And it was deferred maintenance too,
Yep.
right?
I just think about, and again, this isn't dealing with the district, when the city tried to get one passed and they had everything lumped together and people were like, oh, I would have liked this, but not this. I feel like if there's 2, then people can kind of base their importance on, you know, what they feel.
That's a good perspective.
But didn't you say, Jane, that if we did that because we need the operating, it would be with the caveat that even if number 2 got passed and number 1 didn't, then you don't get either, right?
Yep. So you would structure the question in a way that if it's.
You
lack-
could structure that.
Yes.
You could structure it in a way, and it would be our recommendation to structure it in a way.
Yep. And so then, you know, it's that, give them something to say no about so they feel good, which I don't really like that strategy. I'm more with Kyle, let's ask what we need, but you can ask, right? So you can say, the second question, let's just use it as a tech levy, you know, a tech levy of $1 million overall, but this can only go in if question 1 passes. So you still get what you.
Question 1 can pass, it's not married to the other one.
Yes.
Right.
But this is where I struggle on that methodology of it, because it's like a true false, right? It's like you're baiting and switching on that. I think it's better to, if we're gonna ask 2 questions, ask the 2 questions. But my fear is if we ask the 2 questions and we get the one that we really don't, it's not gonna impact us that much.
That's
We're
the one
SOL.
people approve, yeah, the lower
So
basis one.
that's why, again, my thought process on that was just go after, to your point, that the main one on it and not give the option. But again, that's up to what we decide to do on
And
that.
the other hard part is, other public entities can just levy. They can just make that decision and levy. We have a small authority, which you talked about tonight, that we can levy. The rest of it has to be voter approved. And otherwise we get our money from the state. So it's not like we can build a budget and then just say, this is what we're gonna do. This is how much we need, sort of a thing, where other government entities, that's the way they're built and they can function. So we do have to be mindful as well, because people have the opportunity to make a decision, where the rest of the case is just done to them.
Yeah, we're a little backwards in a finance world where we get told what our revenue is and we have to make our expenditures match. I don't know what other industry in the world is that way.
So a couple things. It sounds like based on the data that we have around our enrollment and the housing developments, that with enrollment being stable, are we pretty comfortable saying that we would not need to bond in the next 10 years for an additional building, at least based on the projected enrollment that we have? And given the current state of our buildings and our long-term facilities maintenance plan and.
I would love to say yes, but, you know, in finance, here's the thing. Like, there's so many things we don't control. Take, for example, our special education, right? Unfortunately, 917, just like many of us, hasn't been able to hire the staff that they need. Where we would be sending children to 917, we've now had to find classrooms within our own district. And so to say that, well, we might be able to make it if we can put all of our other kids back at 917 that should be there, recapture our classrooms, and plus then community ed doesn't need any classrooms for Kid Connection. I would hate to put my name in ink on that line because there's so many things we just don't know that could happen.
That makes sense.
I would also share that there may be a neighboring district that not too long ago closed a couple of buildings because of declining enrollment and are now building buildings because of the housing developments and things like that. So I understand I think it's a really good question. But Jane, I would just say, I would not be willing to say
Okay.
that, because you never know, right? In 5 years, we still, I mean, we looked at our map with Dennis, and we have so much land that could be developed. And we know that there's things coming out of Ag Preserve along some major arteries in our district and stuff like that, so I don't know.
That's helpful. The other thing then, that would help me, and this goes back to what Steve said a little bit earlier, but it's difficult to hear us estimate something like 4.4 million without understanding where does that come from? What is the impact to our teachers, to our learners? Especially because I feel like we already run pretty lean, and I don't, from the conversations that I have with parents, and this, of course, would be an important part of our community engagement work around this topic is what's important to them, but that's unique to each family, right? That's unique to their learners, that's unique to their passions. And so I feel comfortable saying that nobody wants to see what they care about go away. And so I share all this to say, part of that would be hearing from the community and understanding what, what their thoughts are and what their feelings are on it, but also understanding whether it's 4.4 million or 2 million or 6 million, where does that come from and what is the day-to-day impact on those that are employed by our district and that are, the students that go here. And so
what I can tell you is that 2 million, even at 1 million, it's gonna impact our day-to-day.
Right,
in
'cause
our-
we
in our
already made-
classrooms.
we already made reductions
Yeah,
this
so
year.
it doesn't matter, because again, to your point, whether we run lean or not, no matter what it is, every part of our system provides a service.
Right.
Whether it is in the classroom, because if A goes away, somebody's gotta pick up A.
Right.
And that might be more responsibility in a building, in a classroom, or things like that. It will be. My bigger fear is, and I shared this with the board, is we go through all of this process. We set a target that's 1, 2, 3, 4 million, whatever it is. Our budget timeline is different than the state's. And it is going to be emotional because, to your point, people are passionate about the things that they care about. And so it doesn't matter what you look at, that's important to somebody or some family. And to see it be talked about, to see it show up on a list as even something that's potential is harming.
Yeah.
And to go through all that and then have the state do, and again, is it likely? It may or may not, right? I mean, they're sitting on 1.1 billion that they set aside for schools, but they may choose not to do anything with that. But would be to go through all of that and then, hey, you know what? We're gonna give you 2% and we're gonna take care of half your special ed cross subsidy. Well, 2%, half our cross subsidy, we're a balanced budget now with some of our assigned fund. And we've
Right.
gone through that exercise of talking about all those things and I think damage a lot of relationships.
I
And I
think
know
so,
we
too.
have to do that. I just don't know
Well,
what
you're
the
not
best
just
practice
talking
is.
about things, right?
They're people.
People
It's
attached
their
to those things
livelihood,
that.
yeah.
I don't
have
think,
to
because
get
I've
cut.
been through that. I remember we've been through that 8 years ago or 7 years ago when the list came up in the meetings. I still think the public needs to be aware what could happen. And let them know it's not a threat. It's just, here's what could possibly happen if this doesn't pass or if the state doesn't come through with money.
Yeah, I agree
Right,
with you.
certainly.
I think the train left the station on that when they
I
didn't
do have
do
a
anything in May.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When this referendum kind of expires, do all the things that were, do the class sizes go out the window too? Because that was attached to that, as far as like keeping class sizes the way that they were, things like that?
That would all be conversations at the board table.
Yeah, I think
Yes, to that question, yes, I would think it would be without speaking out of line. I mean, I'm pretty sure that would play into it.
So,
and helping our community members understand that class sizes or programs
Yep.
or,
But I think to Jason's point, it is not a fun atmosphere to be in. But again, I think people, you just got to set the stage to people, let them know that this, you know, the sky is falling.
Well,
This is
that's
what could
the thing,
happen.
right? If that's what we're
Right.
modeling and preparing for, then we need to know what's gonna happen if that's the scenario that we're faced with.
Yep.
So,
That is a balance because we're charged with that responsibility as a board and something that we must do. But to Jason's point, if you're someone, whether it's your program or your livelihood, you end up on that list, even if by, you know, some blessing you were able to keep, you now know that when or if it comes time, you made the short list, and that just doesn't feel good. You know, it doesn't.
The other hard part is, I mean, if you look at, so you look at districts are all basically the same. Because we have to, I mean, we are organized very similar. You know, when it comes time for budget reductions and realignments, it's all similar stuff, right? I mean, you can go look and see what other districts have done and gone through, because there's no super creative way to go about doing it. You're talking about programs, opportunities, people, things like that, because that's what we are. We have those things, and when we don't have enough money, they need to go.
You have to prioritize.
Or you need to figure out how to, you know, offset those and ship them to something else outside and do some other things. You know, so I do understand what people are saying. I would be hesitant about putting lists together publicly too soon. I do think it needs to be done, but my perspective would be is to Hannah's point, trying to balance potential damage and also giving people a realistic idea of what could happen based on some of those things. And I think if people are listening to this and wondering now, they can do some search and see what other districts have done, because our approach, we can have different ways of going about that, but in the end, it's probably it probably won't be too much different.
Yeah, so there's a balance I think we're gonna have to strike in all of this. I'm more aligned with Steve on transparency and kind of having the open conversation, as hard as that may be, and I fully respect that damage, but the hard part of that too, though, is, I read this article in the Star Tribune or something like that, probably 10 or 15 years ago, and they called it when the federal government goes through this, they call it in Washington, the Washington Monument Game. And what they do is they shut down the national parks in order to cause the most pain and the most panic and the most number of phone calls onto Congress to get that budget passed, right? And unfortunately, the number of types of programs that probably end up on a list like this are gonna feel like the Washington Monument Game here in ISD 192. But I don't want that to be the impression that people have. I think that's how it felt in 2015, as somebody who was engaged at the level I was in 2015. And so I don't want to play into that cynicism. So transparency and that open conversation helps to alleviate that, but I guess what I'm getting at is we need to find that balance where we're respecting and honoring those people, right? And those programs and the concerns of our families, with that need to not play into cynicism as we're trying to build towards a possible referendum. That's I think my 2 cents on that.
Well, and I think to the referendum point, to your point too, if it was Jane or Jason that said, if we start from a place of need, what are our needs and what do we want to maintain? That will drive then the conversation around what is our level of comfort from taking from the fund balance, or that if we start with that, and something I think we've done well is what are our needs? What do we want to be able to do? And then what is the gap in order to be able to continue to do that well? And then that drives the how much and the when and you know, based on the scenarios that, thanks to the finance committee for you guys putting this together. It was really informative.
But
So-
even that exercise of going through a wants and needs list is a list.
Right.
And somebody's gonna find their thing on the wants list.
Right.
And they're like, that's something I need, right? And that's, no matter what we do.
Yeah,
that's-
you're not gonna make everybody happy,
Right.
unfortunately. But you said like the earliest we could go out for anything would be next November, correct?
Yeah, we already missed the deadlines for this year.
So what is this timeline? Obviously, there's further conversation, but what does the timeline look like as far as evaluating wants and needs and things like that?
So, for the budget, what we're hoping is that by October, the board can give us a target, right? So you're gonna say it's 4 million, 5 million, 3 million, 1.5 million, whatever it may be. So then we can start building that. Because we start budget, I mean, we need to start, I mean, as soon as you give us that number, we're gonna start having conversations.
And I think to that conversation within, my suggestion would be to kick this back to the finance committee to talk about what is the target. And as part of that, we built in the assumption, that we would use the remaining $2 million in the assigned fund balance. I think part of the conversation that needs to be brought back to the board, I think through the finance committee, is what are other potential ways to offset that if the board is saying, we're gonna go out in 2023, in the fall of 2023, you know, and, because the reality is this in school districts too, if you have to go through a reduction process that takes everything down to the bare minimums, it is really hard to bring those things back up. And is, you know, and instead of trying to play into the cynicism of, well, you're just cutting this so that you can get something passed, like, how do we continue to provide what people value and bridge the gap to where we can go out and ask people, do you value this? Sure. And do you want to continue this?
Right.
You know, and that there's kind of, in my mind, two ways of doing that, and it just all depends on where you get to and where you're at. So I think in our minds, we were talking about this as do the scenarios, kind of have the board get a picture of just 3 generic ones, but then have the finance committee get back together, hone in, and we can do some of that, but that October 1st date can really give us that enrollment number, which will really drive that part of things. And then, you know, potential look at of, okay, the deficit is X million. We're gonna use 2 million of the assigned fund balance. That gets us to Y.
Yeah.
Are there other pieces we wanna tap into?
Yep.
Fund balance,
Right.
other assigned fund balances that get it down to this,
The iPad.
to bridge to,
Right.
a referendum potentially in the fall of 2023. Now, if the board says, we're gonna wait until 2024 and just do a renew, well, then that changes, you know, some of those things. But I think the finance committee can maybe have some conversations too about, you know, what would make the most sense, but that.
So there are not other specific questions that we're looking to answer tonight? This is a great update. I know that there's some excitement about this model. I will tell you my feeling of this, having gone through all 3 scenarios, is gravity. Because even the rounding third scenario requires some massive, some considerable cuts someplace, some considerable major financial decisions. So I think I am excited that we have this capability, and I'm excited that we'll be able to make decisions that also will help to influence and affect, whether it's a health plan redesign for the district, as that sounds like something that's gonna have to happen too, based on other recent conversations, to contract negotiations over the next couple of years, and continue to reinforce, you know, this is hard, this is difficult work, and I know it's just gonna be a tough few years, I think, no matter what we do going forward. So again, my sense of this is, great, I'm glad we have this tool, I'm really glad we have this tool, but man, I feel a sense of gravity right now.
Well, and I thought Steve laid it out really nice when you started, Steve, that there are a couple questions that sounds like that would help the finance committee to move forward. You said, so just either confirm that this would still be helpful tonight or not, but you said how much of the general fund would we be comfortable with? Is it not going at all below that 8%? To me, I don't know the dollar amounts, but so is there a level for a rainy day year or a gap that, that the board would be comfortable with? considering the operating or tech levy or both, you said, and then the timing of that. So that seems to me,
Or what's the range of best practices for unassigned fund balance? I mean, I'm assuming H12 is a best practice. Actually, when I've looked it up, I think it is a best practice,
For
but
assigned,
unassigned.
unassigned, yeah, 10 to 12. Well, you know, if you think about it, really, I mean, in the budget world, you want to have 6 months of operating expenses. And we're not even close to that. So, you know, when we're talking 8 to 12%, that's not even near what a company would typically have. But school districts are notorious for not being there. But if you were to ask me financially, I'd say we need 6 months. I would change the fund balance to 6 months. Now, is that feasible with taxpayer dollars? And no, it's not. So
But in
you
some
gotta
cases,
balance
this is
that.
about cash flow in case the state
Right.
runs against you, right? So
Yep, so you want to have some money in there.
but I guess my question is, would it still be helpful to hear from the board to help guide then the next steps as a finance committee to start to have that, be able to develop a target, then move on to the,
I think tonight, in my opinion, was really to just throw everything at you. Just so you know, like, a list would be great, but again, to Jason's point, how that would affect everybody in the community. Looking at, you know, possibly some money that's sitting for iPads is an option. So we do have options that we can use, but then I guess we would have to sit down and kind of sharpen the pencils and say, well, here's basically our final reductions before we go to, you know, I hate to use the word list, but before we go to an actual, here's top 10 things we got to cut.
well, and I guess I think about it from the community engagement standpoint, that if we don't have some of that discussion tonight or come to some clarity on that, then we come back in October, then we have then a target that gets developed. We're delaying a lot of the community engagement opportunity. We're getting into the holidays. So if it's something that we're pretty certain we're gonna need a significant reduction going into 23 and 24, I'd rather be able to, as a community engagement committee, bring recommendations, because we're gonna have to bring recommendations back to the board also to get your thoughts on that. We can't just kick in and start doing it. But ideally, and this is based on what Dennis shared with us too, there are certain times of the year that's ideal to do, fall being one of them, the holidays not. And so to get any meaningful input into our budget development, which really starts, I know you said right away, but it comes to us, I think, first in December, right? And then it ends up being finalized in June. So
there we are behind the 8 ball.
yeah, I think we have a sense of urgency to get some of this firmed up a little bit tonight, so that maybe you guys could come back at the October meeting. We could start as a committee planning a little bit, and be able to both reconvene.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
The only thing I would say is, I think I understand wanting to maybe talk about a target around the fund balance of what you're, I think you need the deficit number first.
Okay.
Because because it makes a difference, right? If the deficit number is 6 million and you buy it down to 4 million, that's different than if it's 3 million and it's bought down to 1, you know what I mean? So I think us getting a better handle on our enrollment and sitting down with the finance committee and having, and looking at exactly what we believe that target should be, and then bringing back to the board some additional options to think about of ways to align that through some of those other things might make some sense. Now, I think from a public engagement committee, we looked at 3 different scenarios. You know, I mean, if we were gonna guess, you're guessing around reductions, I'd say between probably 4 to, you
4
know,
to 6?
yeah, 4 to 6 million. Deficit of 4 to 6 million.
Well, and I think that's one question around, that we'd need to engage the public in, right, just going into next year. But the second would be around if we as a board, if we know or have clarity that we're thinking we will need to go out for a referendum sooner, that's another piece of that, because they go hand in hand, and it would be a lot easier to try and get families' thoughts on that, you know, in one setting, help them understand the connection between the two versus, I guess, trying to go out, talk about budget reductions for next year, but oh, and then come back in a few months and say, well, we're also talking about this levy.
Is there any parallel path that this can take where the finance committee can take this back for more specific discussions or recommendations around targets? And we can kick something to the public engagement committee to say, hey, there's some scenarios you can start thinking about, and how might you want to start bringing recommendations back to the board about what that looks like?
I
Is
think
it high
there would-
level enough that we can do that work?
We already had that discussion as a community engagement committee because we had so much historical knowledge with our administrative partners who basically have the strategies. It's once we as a board make a decision or have a clearer direction on what we're gonna do, that will drive what we bring back for approval and input from the full board. But that list is already
So
drafted.
you need more.
We need more before the community engagement committee can decide on next steps.
Well, the number one question is gonna be from the community, what are we cutting? That's the number one question.
Right, but also as it relates to the levy, if we're gonna have a contractor, if there's somebody who's gonna support us in identifying what's the tolerance for for the tax amount, as the needs are identified, there's, you know, at least a multi-month process for some of this. And this is, again, all coming back to the board. You think of our 2 meetings per
Yeah, I
month.
know, that's a challenge.
Hey, Lori, I know that there's typically, because there's the engagement part, but I also know that there's kind of a timeline when you want to start that process in terms of the levy aspect of things, that's not too far out.
Right.
So people forget about it. So typically, how far out before a levy takes place do you begin some of those things? In the past, how long prior?
As far as communication or as far as what we need legally?
No, communication with the community,
Right.
starting to share, you know, the
If we
why
think we're
behind
going
it
out
and
in
some of
November
those.
23, we need to be
Act now.
talking about, right,
We would have to be, for sure, no later.
Spring, early spring.
right. And we'd be, as a board, preparing that, working with the admin team for what that looks like in the lead up.
I just don't know how much we can maneuver that $4 to $6 million deficit to come out with any kind of a different outcome. I guess that's my question I have. Is,
Well, again, we have money in assigned fund balances and a fund balance that the board can choose to use
Right.
to manipulate, because
correct,
4 million is different than 3 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Right.
even that's a big difference.
So I
And
think what you need, or what we need to see is, what are those balances, right? Because we see them all the time, in a format that can drive a
and the
conversation.
rest of the impact moving forward
Yeah.
Where's
from
the impact moving
taking
forward?
that away.
Yeah, because we had an offline conversation about, you know, the Apple, the Apple sales, the technology.
Yeah, the
assigned
Apples.
fund balance, right?
And-
But the impact of, what's the downstream cost of that, if you were to tap into that? At some point, you're still gonna need to find that money
Right.
to finance a technology purchase, right? So we'd hate to look back and say, well, we spent this for the short term, and we really hurt ourselves in the long term.
The harder part is to get a really good target, we're gonna have to wait until about around October 1st to get our enrollment. That's the difficult thing.
I mean, that makes sense from the more detailed planning purposes, but for the timing of potentially a referendum, we have 3 options: November 23, November 24, November 25. November 24 is a presidential year. We know that tends to not be as ideal. November 25 gives us no opportunity. So I guess as a board, do we at least want to have some discussion on the timing of that? If we feel like it's November 23, that would, I think, allow us to,
That would be our recommendation as an administrative team, would be the fall of 2023.
it gives us other opportunities. So at least if we agree on that, not with the amounts or the things obviously would do that, but just that we know that would be
I get a little anxious about, again, it's sort of that cynical side of that we timed it with, around not having it at an election. I mean, I think if we've got a good proposal, we should hope that it passes on the merits of the proposal and the needs. I mean, I hope, but I just, what it means right now, though, is we need to decide if we want to try to do the revoke and replace early. I mean, I think what you're talking about is we're probably either going to do something in '23, or we're going to look at '24 and '25, no matter what, right? And so we could have a scenario where we're doing levies all three, referendums all 3 years. The one question in front of us right now is, because we might have to, exactly. And so the one question before us exactly at this time is, do we think we need to do something in 2023?
Right.
So we just need to get to a place where we can answer that question. 2024 is, I think, a foregone conclusion. We need to probably go early. We need to go at that year.
I think we do need to go out next fall. The
I
longer
think
we
you're
have,
probably right,
the
right? Yeah.
better.
Yeah. So then, what are the inputs that we need to come at that? That's, I think, the questions before us right now.
No, I think we have a direction of what, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Would you agree of, I think, where we want to go then as a board to bring back in, or,
October 10th would be our next
October
work
10th.
session.
but again, is that too long to wait?
Well, because we have to wait till 10/1 to have the enrollments, right? And then we can actually make specific,
Yeah, I think what Hannah was
Numbers.
asking is, what, does the board have a preference in terms of 23, 24, or 25 first? So if the board is leaning towards 23, then the public engagement group could at least start
And we
working
can
on
bring
and thinking and
recommendations
putting
back at
timelines
that.
Oh, I
together.
heard 23, that's why, okay, I thought that's what,
So
okay. So I
I'll-
guess ask everybody, Kyle, that.
I'll
I
play
just to
fast and
clarify.
loose, and I would say, yes, you should, here's my vote, right? I think you should do that. And worst case scenario, we decide not to, and you've gone through good exercise. I honestly, I think the answer, if that's an easy yes, I think you should assume that we're going to do a revoke and replace conversation in November 2023. That's my, Steve,
No, I agree.
Others agree.
That's what I
Likewise.
thought.
that's unanimous. Mike, Kennedy?
And in the community survey from 2020, there is some questions around that. I
Right.
mean, that just would give you some preliminary stuff, but that would give you some information.
So would
what
it
we'll
be
do. So we'll
value
plan on
then,
bringing
if
things
you're gonna
back
get the hard
in
numbers,
session too.
October 1st, that we have can we have
Finance.
put on the
that first
calendar
week.
I just don't see
a
any way
special
that works.
session to say, okay, we have all the data now, before that meeting of the 10th, we're basically all geared up and ready to go.
You're
Well, I
talking
think
about the finance
committee
committee.
has to meet before, after 10/1 first.
Right, but then, correct. So say we meet on the 3rd, right? Can we call once we meet, we're gonna have the information though, to move forward to the board.
And we bring it to it on the work session in October.
Yeah, on the 10th.
Discussion.
Is that quick enough?
I don't see it's a week out. If
Oh,
you meet
okay.
on the 3rd, it's literally the next Monday.
Okay.
But what you need to realize is October 1 numbers isn't October 1st, right? So we collect all of our data for October, and it usually comes out later than October 1.
Right, but this is where we
So-
talk about the forecast, where we gotta put some hard data in there. Regardless at that point, we gotta make some decisions.
Yep,
Yeah.
Stick to
I just want, because we have a Mars report that we get our enrollment that is has been trending to be close to end of year. We will not have that report on October 1.
I think we should feel comfortable using that number that you get at the earlier moment.
Okay.
Yeah, we just don't have to, what she's saying is we don't have to meet right on October 1st. We just have to meet between October 1st and
And the 10th.
the 10th.
Yes,
And we're
yes,
still not gonna
that's
have-
what I'm
Feel better,
saying, that
October 1st is a
first week of
Saturday, so
October.
you'd be pulling like extra.
Does that
We're not
give
gonna
you
be
enough,
October
like,
1st.
when do you get that?
So I can run enrollment any day, right? But the problem with when I run I just want you guys to know, when I run enrollment, right, it's just for that specific day.
Correct.
And so it doesn't have the bits and pieces and all of that stuff that gets in my October 1 counts. And so, just so people understand the difference between the numbers that we'll be using is totally fine.
When do you get your October 1
That's what I
count?
was just gonna say.
Yeah, I want to say it's end of October, beginning of November.
We always got them late, if I remember, that was the
Yeah.
problem.
We can use that number, which will give us a ballpark,
Yep.
which is
Jason
stuff
will
like
be
that.
out there with the tally, counting children.
Click, 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 as they come off the buses.
So 2% fudge factor,
I was going to say 5.
I want to count my fives. So before we leave, we'll find a time and we will bring back, we can because a target is a target, right? It's, that gives us that number. And I think my suggestion would be for the committee to then to look at all of our fund balances and just look at options, and then we could bring the deficit that we're projecting to the board, and we could talk about potentially alignment and then what we would need to reduce at that time.
And then we can meet as a community engagement committee and also bring our recommendations or input back for the board for discussion at that same work session to talk about how to engage the public around.
And everyone else looking as forward to October 10th as I am?
Why not?
All right. Are we good? All right. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
And thanks, Finance Committee, for putting all that together. I know it was a lot of work, and
Not me.
thank you, Steve, Jane, Jason, really helpful.
I wish, I don't know how we could be, again, I think it'd be nice to show the board that, sometime that spreadsheet. Because I
I
think you
really
guys,
like the sheet that shows the referendums for each district.
Yes.
I think the public should see that, just like how absolutely lean we are,
so maybe that's something we can come up with,
because that's helpful
Come out of the Public
as a
Engagement
visual.
Committee.
Yeah.
just send, yeah, yep.
Engage people around that.
And that's their, I know I said that before, that's what the current state is. Is there any pulse on what everyone's doing?
Well, I think we just got something, there was a number that didn't pass, but those were all bonds, in August. And there's a handful going out in October, and I don't know. I can look and see, we usually get it from AMSD, so when it comes through again, I'll just share it with the board.
Okay.
So, I'm not 100% sure.
All right. Our next items are policy 301, 302, 304, 401, and 402. Go ahead.
I'm assuming everyone kind of looked at these. There really isn't anything to discuss. They're just MSBA policies, so any kind of tweaks that they made. The policy committee didn't have any concerns with them. Some of them, it's literally changing one word. Some of them, it's just taking out a reference. Then there's no changes, so if anyone has questions.
And this is the first reading
This
for
is
all
the
of
second
these. Oh, the
reading.
second for all
Yep.
of these, okay.
So we'll vote on approve them at our next meeting.
Yeah, I've got nothing.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right, well, with that, our last item, was there any public comment? I mean, I see we have some folks here, so I just want to make sure. There's no public comment, so our last item is adjourn the meeting. So can I get a motion to adjourn?
So I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 7:37.
Second.
Motion by Doyle, second, yeah,
I didn't.
by Dentinger.
Call me whatever you
Say
want.
It's fine.
You got a name tag
the
and
thing is-
everything.
Well, no,
Well, he can't.
well, no, the thing is I want to say the N, and I'm going to, anyway, I don't want to
I'll
mess
just
it up.
turn it that way from now on.
Thank you. So, motion by Doyle, second by Dentinger. All in favor, say aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Take it home.